This right here is what we call a neuromuscular junction. This is where the nervous system touches a muscle and controls it. This will be the most difficult concept we'll cover in this chapter, and I'll start it tomorrow. So today I'm just getting through the skeletal system. When we talk about skeletons in animals, we have two types of skeletons, endoskeleton and exoskeleton. Endoskeleton can be found inside and exo outside. What's the difference in the protection that they offer? One protects the inside. Which one is that? The exoskeleton protects the insides because it's a hard shell. What about the endoskeleton? It's more of a support structure. There is protection, minimal though, and when you compare it to an exoskeleton. So most people are familiar when you say endo versus exo, they know the difference between those two. Exoskeleton is found on the outside of an organism. The types of organisms that have exoskeletons animals are classified as arthropods. Arthropods are like your insects, your crabs, your shrimp, and such. Everyone that has an exoskeleton has to molt that exoskeleton in order to grow. So that exoskeleton constricts the amount in which they can grow. A turtle does not have an exoskeleton. A turtle has a shell with an endoskeleton. So turtles don't molt their shells. They grow with their shell. Their shell grows with them. Okay, so just because those are some areas where people get confused. The type of exoskeleton an organism has varies based on that species. It could be really thin and simple or very thick and complex. It just depends. I do want to point out, besides the fact it must be shed or molted, that it has the carbohydrate chitin. We talked about chitin when we learned biomolecules. Chitin is a carbohydrate that we find present in fungi and in the exoskeleton of arthropods. For those of you studying science after this, anytime chitin comes up, it's either fungi or exoskeleton. When I initially taught you this, I said when you step on an insect and it makes that crunchy sound, it's because of chitin. Okay, so some arthropods, little shrimps. Okay, endoskeletons. They grow on the inside of an organism. They don't protect the surface, but they offer support, but they do protect to an extent some of your vital organs. Like our endoskeleton surrounds our two lungs and our heart, but there's gaps in it, like our rib cage has gaps. So it does provide a supportive structure, but does it protect all that soft tissue? Not all the time. Like it's not an impermeable structure. We find endoskeletons in sponges, which are our most simple animal. The very first animal, sponges, echinoderms, and vertebrates. And most of you are familiar with vertebrates, but what is an echinoderm? Echinoderms. Echinoderms are like your sea stars, your sea urchins, your sea cucumbers. So echinoderms are your starfish. They appear to have this exoskeleton, but in actuality, it is an endoskeleton. Okay? These skeletons store minerals, like you and I store phosphate salts and calcium salts. And that's what gives those skeletons their firmness. Here's an echinoderm. Okay, and their endoskeleton up close. Okay, in a vertebrate. So a vertebrate is just an organism that has a vertebral column. Their skeleton can be broken down into two classifications, the axial and the appendicular. You do not need to know all the bones in the body for biology. You do need to know the division of the skeleton. So axial is everything down the center. Appendicular includes your arms and legs, and the associated girdle that go with it. And I'm going to show you that on the next slide. So axial and appendicular. A joint is where two bones come together. And the whole purpose of joints is to increase our mobility. How does a joint increase our mobility? Yes, like if we didn't have them, like we wouldn't be able to manipulate our fingers or our arms or our legs. We would just be this rigid structure. So the joint allows for an increase in mobility. For this course, you will not need to know how to classify the different types of joints, like synarthrotic, anterarthrotic, and diarthrotic. You will not, you just need to be familiar with the structure itself. Okay, on this diagram, this shows you the difference between the axial skeleton and the appendicular. Axial is here in the off-white color in the center. The appendicular includes the limbs, the lower and upper limbs, and their associated girdles. So your hip bones, which are technically called coxal bones, there are two of them, and they support and connect your legs to your axial skeleton. For your arms, your girdle is your clavicle and your scapula. Those two come together to form a girdle so that your arm can attach to your axial skeleton. So that's why, even though they appear to be in the center, with the axial skeleton, they're actually part of the appendicular skeleton. So this slide is color-coded. A bone is a living tissue. All bone is living tissue, which means that it's constantly metabolic, or it's constantly carrying out metabolism, which means it's constantly growing. But that means that the skeleton that you have today is different than the one you had as a freshman at Red Oak High School. It's completely been replaced. As your diet continues to change, your skeleton will also change. If you have a really weak skeleton right now and decide that you're going to eat more healthy, hearty foods, your skeleton will become stronger. Okay? For most of you, you've already hit puberty, so you can't manipulate your height anymore. But in the event that you did have a poor diet and you were still growing, if you increased your diet, the specific minerals, vitamins that you were lacking, you could increase the amount of metabolism and the resources that those metabolic resources, and that individual will grow more. But as soon as they hit puberty, hormone levels, they get so high they cut off all that growth hormone. Okay, so, anyways, so you're constantly recycling. With that also being said, you could be super strong and healthy right now, and then decide to go off to college and just eat noodles the whole time, and Cokes, and you would literally start to leach your bones, and they would become weaker. By the time you finished college, you could actually be a few centimeters shorter, and your posture could also be less pronounced. You tend to start to slouch. So the goal is that you do take care of yourself all the time. If you do know that you're going to be living on noodles and Cokes, you're taking a multivitamin so that you're getting the necessary nutrients and metabolic resources that are necessary to give you strong bones and maintain your organ health. So your skeleton, by the time you're graduating college, will be different than your skeleton today. And it will change like that over time. We do tend to see that older people do lose height. They shrink because their diets, they become more picky, or they're on a fixed income and they can't afford a lot of different food. So they go from being 6'2", 6'3", 6 foot, 5'11", as their posture begins to kind of go in and their bones become less rigid. Okay? Osteoblasts are baby bone cells. Osteocytes are mature bone cells. You need to know the difference between those two. These are both responsible for building bone up. Osteoclast is the cell that breaks bone down. Because it says osteo, you need to know that that associates it with the bone. Osteo, anything is bone. Okay? The mineral components that are stored in our bones include calcium salts and phosphorus salts. We have a whole lot of other things, but if our diet does not include calcium and phosphates that we need, guess where our body takes it from? Our bones. Our body will break our bones down to get the nutrients that it needs in order to carry out its own metabolic functions. So you can literally start to disintegrate so that you can carry out your metabolic functions. Of course, then other things go wrong.
You said osteoblasts.
Osteoblasts are baby bone cells. Osteoclasts break bone down. Osteocytes are grown-up bone cells. Yes, ma'am. And that's where we need to stop, or we needed to get to today. Okay, I will.